It has been a long time since we've been here with the book club. We had a few technical difficulties late March to April, but we're back with a bang, and we can guarantee that we have a wonderful season lined up of interesting things. And we're going to kick off this reboot with a look at the children's publishing industry in Africa. We're going to start off today with just a high level bird's eye view. And I want to give you some Mobi sites that are run by African companies, by Africans, where you can get digital content for your children straight away. And then in the coming weeks, we're going to talk to some veterans in the children's book publishing industry, particularly writers. And as you know, true to form, African female writers on the continent who've been working in this field for decades. And so we're looking forward to what we have lined up for the rest of the month of May. And we're already fully booked for June and July. So let's cozy up this winter and get reading African female authors. So, as you know, I always like to start every live with a quote from an African female author. And today I've chosen Dr. Dinah Johnson. She's a children's book author, an African American, and a professor of children's literature at the University of South Carolina. And this is what she has to say about children's literature. Children's literature is in some ways the most important literature. It is one of the places from which children get ideas about their cultures and our ways of living and beliefs. Children's literature should be cultural instead it should be cultural instead of manual. So that is Dr. Dinah Johnson or Diana Johnson, and she's quoted on munakalati.org, which is DOLA for children's book. So I think that sums up why I think this is such an important topic. So why should you care about children's book industry or publishing in Africa? What does this all mean? What's the deal with children's books, anyways? Well, the biggest publishers in Africa are actually educational publishers, and there's a reason for that. That's because the largest growing population in Africa are young people. Now, ironic, interesting fact about that is a majority of young people in Africa are actually out of school. As of 2016, according to the World Bank, 89 million people between the ages of 12 and 24 were out of school. And this number is expected to have increased during the last 2 years of the COVID pandemic due to rolling lockdowns and the digital divide, which affects women or young girls more than it does young boys. So, who's reading these books that make up 66 to 70% of the African publishing industry, which is rumored to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars? In Central and East Africa, it's almost valued at $300 million plus, and it's growing. Well, most of those people would probably be middle class children. But let's look at the bulk of where our children are and those children that are not reading or not in school. And 60% of sub Saharan youth is actually rural. So it looks like a big bulk of those people that are not in school are girls. And then there are rural or remotely placed young people. And if we look at the region, it's disproportionately weighted towards sub Saharan Africa. So why should we care? What does this matter to us? Well, the whole thing with reading, right, is we read for two reasons, for meaning and pleasure. So from way back when we started telling stories to each other orally, we told each other those stories to be able to tell each other there is a pit outside of the cave. And that's how messages were passed on. And that's how we knew to avoid certain things in our ecosystem that were dangerous to us. And that was way, 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 way back in time. But we've carried that principle forward in terms of why we communicate, why we even bother talking to each other, why we even greet each other. So, in African cultures, and particularly in Zimbabwean cultures, greeting each other as a form of, the way that we live and the way that we relate to one another is really important. Because living in remote areas, we would say hello to strangers because strangers would tell us news from out there. I have come from here and the weather is like this. And, I survived a lion over there and this is what we need to do. And that is the meaning, the use of information. So now what does that look like in our modern world today? Well, obviously, we read, and you want your children to read because we need people to be able to read and understand laws. We need people to be able to read and understand the consequences of immoral behavior or behavior that is dangerous to our better interest as a community and a society, like murdering and stealing. And we teach that, of course, in the home, but that's reinforced by the laws that we write that people need to read to enforce and to follow. Some of the other reasons we need literacy to read is because we want our children to be able to read medicine labels so they take the right amount of dosage of medicine and they don't overdose on medicine. And practical things like that, reading to follow a recipe so that we can create balanced meals and feed ourselves. The process of reading helps us develop the process of thinking and therefore reasoning. Because once we start to group these ideas together and we start to put cause and effect together, we start to develop thought processes and ideas and systems for how we should do things and how we should improve why we do things. So, reading from a meaning perspective and from a why we read and what is useful about reading is important for our children because you and I want our children to know that. And you and I want our children to know that now because children psychologically between the ages of 6 and 7 are starting to make the big decisions about who they want to be. And they do that from that age to probably about age 12. After that period of time, children are spending a lot of time dealing with whatever they've decided during those years of their life and the world that they're encountering. And they're testing those ideas and decisions they've made about who they want to be, what they believe, and most importantly, what they believe is right, what they believe is wrong, and how they're going to resist what they believe is wrong. So, if our children can't reason for themselves, cannot think or connect thoughts together into a logical framework, we've got a problem because some of those kids are going to be kids that we're going to have to encounter in emergency rooms when we are much older and they're the people that are the doctors at hospitals, the policemen on duty, the judges in our courtrooms, the lawyers defending our cases in court. So, what's the other side of this coin? So, it's important for us to read. Does that mean we read? Not necessarily. The best way to get people to read is for pleasure. And a lot of children's literature and a lot of children's literature movement is actually concerned about how do we get people to read. So, if most of your publishing is about education, it means that children are only reading because they have to or because they're being told in school that they have to. A lot of them might actually be struggling because, as we've just talked about, many of them are actually out of school or have been in school for a brief period of their lives before they've dropped out. So, how do we get people or how do we get young people to be interested in reading? Well, that's when we use the medium of fiction and stories because we want to create pleasure out of reading. If you can get somebody to want to read for themselves, you open up their world and stimulate them to use this as a tool for solving problems throughout the whole mechanism of just them being an able bodied or rather fully engaged human being. So, when we read for pleasure, we take the function of narratives and storytelling to a deeper level. This is where we engage our belief, inspiration, hope, vision in our imagination and activate our will to actually do something. Simple things like follow a recipe or be inspired to travel or go to a country you've never been at before, or fall in love with someone, or face or deal with a family issue, or forgive someone, or start new careers. Because a lot of the stories that will engage us are stories that deal with everyday problems that we are facing as ourselves. And it's the same with children. When they see themselves reflected in the work that they are being made to read, or want to read, they begin to be inspired and engage their beliefs around some of the things they want to do and want to become, and most importantly, who they want to become. And it inspires their agency. So we read for two reasons, for meaning or use, or for pleasure and entertainment. And when we can get people to read for pleasure and entertainment, we obviously can get them to read by association, the things that they need to read for meaning and use. So this is how we start to have profound internal conversations with ourselves. So why should you care? Well, I care because when in my family, my dad used to frog march all of my siblings to the city library at the age of 11. And it was a huge rite of passage for us. And in my family, we are only girls. Well, we're five girls and we've got one brother. And for my father raising us, a lot of people used to criticize him for investing in education for young girls or education for us as girls. The idea was, well, they're just going to get married and go and, be in somebody else's house. But my dad had a firm belief in education, and he had a keen interest and a curiosity in the world around him. He asked a whole lot more questions than he did lecturing. And so he found a lot of joy and a lot of companionship in books, and he passed on that love to us. So by the time that I came along, because I'm a middle child, I'm fourth in my family, I was like, I'm not going to wait until 11 to go get my library card. I want to enter this rich world sooner rather than later. So I pestered and pestered and pestered my parents and my older sisters to be able to take me to the library. And lo and behold, before I turned 11, I was able to go and get a card for myself and take out two books every Friday afternoon or Saturday morning. And those are and remain my most precious memories because in that library, I found endless books that could just take up this hunger and this need to know things I didn't even know I needed to know. Questions I didn't even know I had were awakened by that process of going into the library. Before, obviously, I read my first book, I was just intrigued by the fact that so many people around me always had their head stuck in a book. And they were so captivated and so engaged, they couldn't finish sentences, have a proper conversation with me. And I wanted to be a part of that world too. But thankfully for me, it took. And I really, really started to enter into that world for myself and started to explore different narratives and different stories. Now, I'm going to confess, I'm a child of my generation. So, in my time, a lot of the work that we were reading was still very, very much colonized ideas of the world. There was still a very much strong sort of white narrative about the world. But what interests me and what I find fascinating is when I remember reading those books, I can't remember feeling colonized and I can't remember that dominant white narrative. In fact, a lot of the things or mindsets or values of that system kind of went over my head. What really touched me and what really got me going was the invitation and the permission that those books gave me to ask questions, to investigate mysteries around me, to have and build enduring friendships, and to solve problems. The thing that the book reading taught me was to ask why, to explore the world around me, and to push those boundaries as far as possible and to see that even at my age, there were other little people like me, even if they were people of a different color living in a different country that were solving problems and they were solving big problems and they were making a change in their world. Now, obviously, as I became a teenager, some of those stories started to include stories around relationships and relationships between men and women. And there were now other questions about what I was seeing in those relationships. But what I appreciate about reading and starting to read from a young age, and especially reading mystery from a young age, was that it just gave me a belief that problems can be solved. And I think that actually is probably the most simplest but magical thing that you can get from reading a story that inspires you and a story that awakens your imagination, captivates you, and takes you on a journey or on an arc where an ordinary person encounters extraordinary things and answers huge questions that seem insurmountable, but in strange little ways and with the help of their friends, overcomes that and actually comes to a place of transformation for themselves and creates a transformation outside of themselves. But it all starts within. So for me, reading and the journey of reading and the relationship that I was given when I was younger or inspired when I was younger to read gave me all of those things. So there was an element to my framework of common sense that was very much like, you see a problem, solve it. You have a question, ask it. You find a mystery, get to the bottom of it. Curiosity is not wrong. And I think this is the thing that we want for our children, right? Because I think more than ever, when we're looking at some of the challenges that we have, we're looking at things that are sometimes even beyond us as adults. But we need our children to believe that it is possible for them to find answers to the questions that are even beyond us as adults, that they do have a role to play. And I think what is exciting about what's going on in the children's book industry in Africa is, for the first time in a long time, those children are starting to look like us. They're little brown people in our books and speaking in local and vernacular languages that are going through those same journeys that we experienced 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago in books like The Famous Five, The Secret Seven, and Mallory Towers. And they're telling new and interesting stories. So, what does that look like in terms of you looking for places where you can find these stories for young children? So, there are the traditional big name publishers, the international publishers that have been around for yonks. And they're still here and they're very much dominating in the educational industry. And I want to talk about them, okay? But you know who they are. Then there are obviously some newer sort of post-independent publishers that kind of sparked up in the 1960s. And they've also started to graft in or merge with some of those international publishers and start to work on educational books. And that is a combination of a relationship between government regulations around curriculum and syllabus and what kind of textbooks and how many languages the curriculum will be taught in, that creates a demand for what you're going to get out of that place. But if we're now going to look at reading for pleasure, where do you get those new books? Where do you get those books that are speaking to the now child and that are relevant to the challenges that that child is having? Well, there are amazing independent publishers all over Africa springing up. There are people like Cassava Republic in Nigeria, and they've been running with the Princess Arabella series for a long, long time. They were started in 2006. And you can go onto their website and you can purchase any one of the Princess Arabella books on their website, and obviously get that delivered to you. However, there are challenges. It's easier for them to deliver in Nigeria, but they have been working on e-platforms. Now, in addition to Cassava Republic, there are other bookstores and publishers in Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, that are also working along the same lines, working with children's literature, telling their stories in their languages and making that available online. Okay. But today I want to talk about a different group of people. And of course, before I get to those people, of course, they're obviously the South Africans. Okay. The South Africans are probably one of the better developed children's book industries. But we still have some of the same challenges in terms of translations into vernacular languages, the number of print runs, and the cost of those books and how you get them available to you. But if you want something in your hands now today, I just want to talk about three apps that you can get on Google Play Store today, where you can get three different types or ranges of children's content for African children by Africans in African languages and across different ranges. So the first one I want to just highlight to you is a new kid on the block called bookbeat.co.za. Bookbeat is an app where you can get audio shorts and where you can get African short stories. You can also create your stories. It's got still got a very low number of downloads at this stage. It was launched or released in 2019 and upgraded in 2020, but you can get it on the Google Play Store. It is free to download, and there are stories that are available if you want to get reading some African children's books straight away. Secondly, is African Storybook. Now, African Storybook is kind of like one of the greater sort of digital educational stories out there. They've got an amazing Facebook page, which you can get there. They've got a reader. They've got amazing ways that you can purchase bundles and get a whole whack of content all at the same time. They probably have a more formidable library than Bookbeat, but they've been a lot around a lot longer. Now, with this crew, you really want to get this app for early reading, early learning, and helping your child just sort of develop learning from a literacy point of view or from a reading point of view. Okay, and that is also available on the Play Store. And finally, is AfriComics. AfriComics is AFRICOMIX, and this is where there's a hub of African content creators that are doing a lot of digital sort of graphic stories, comics, African superheroes, and this is kind of the content that you want for your preteens going into your teens. And they've got some amazing stuff. You can download that also on Google Play Store. And from those three apps and from those three communities, you can leapfrog to many, many other smaller independent communities that are doing the same thing for African children. Now, finally, if you're curious to learn more and you need to get started and you want an overview, there are these amazing people in Cameroon called munakalati.org, which in Dola, as I said at the beginning, means children's book. Log on there. They've got amazing blogs, amazing podcasts, and a regular Kid Lit festival. Some discussions that they've curated that are on YouTube, which can give you some ideas around what are the challenges around translating African children's books into different vernacular languages, and where can you actually get some of these books and even more mobile applications that can do some of the things that I was talking about with the first three I shared with you. So that's like a bird's eye, very high level snapshot of the children's book industry, what it means for you, and just getting down to some of the basics and the common sense around why we read and why it's important for us to read. But I hope that I've given you enough to whet your appetite and to start your own journey of discovery and start investigating for yourself what's out there so that you can get your children reading some diversified content, seeing themselves at every stage of their development, doing amazing things, solving problems, and going through things. But yes, definitely there has been a gap for children in the diaspora. Rita Matanda, welcome back. It's so glad to see you. This is one of our regulars. And yes, that is a gap. But remember, next week we're back here with another children's author who has been in the field for a long time, an African female author, and we're going to be focusing on that in May. But we've just given you the bird's eye level, sort of high level. This is where we are. Check out those three apps and let us know your journey. So it's been good to be with you, and it's been good to see you after this long break. We'll see you again next week, same time, 7 p.m. on the Thando channel. Bless you and have a good night.